At the end of my company's year-end party, I came home to find my son collapsed at the door. My brother leaned against the wall, shrugging. "Just disciplined him," he said, his tone flat, like it was nothing. My parents stepped out behind him, cold expressions on their faces. "He deserved it," my dad said with a dismissive wave. I stood there, heart pounding as I looked down at my 8-year-old son, Mason, lying motionless on the porch. His body was twisted at an unnatural angle, his lips chalk white, and his chest barely rising. He wasn't moving. Shaking, I dropped my purse to the ground and dropped to my knees beside him, my dress instantly soaking from the wet concrete. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, barely able to dial the numbers. I managed to hit send, my voice barely a whisper. 9/11, my son. My son is collapsed on the porch, he's barely breathing. Please, hurry. The seconds felt like hours as I pressed my hand to his chest, counting the weak, desperate rises. I looked up at Carter again, his expression unchanged, just staring at me with that damn smirk. It made my blood boil. How could he stand there, so calm, so indifferent, while my son lay there dying? It felt like forever, but finally, I heard the wail of an ambulance in the distance. The sirens grew louder, and my pulse quickened. It felt like time had stretched out, but within minutes the ambulance arrived. The doors screeching open. The paramedics rushed out, and I saw the lead aid paramedic, a man named Ryan, take one look at Mason, and then glance up at my brother. His face drained of color, and he pulled me aside, his voice low and urgent. "Mom, is that really your brother?" Ryan asked, each woman his eyes flickering. To Carter, who hadn't moved an inch, still leaning lazily against the wall. I nodded, confused by the question. Why did it matter? "H&K later." But then Ryan spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because 3 years ago in Georgia, I rolled up on the exact same scene. Same situation. Same guy standing in the exact same spot, wearing the same smirk." The words hung in the air. My heart skipped a beat. What was he saying? Was this some kind of sick joke? But Ryan didn't look like he was joking. He turned to his partner, his voice suddenly more urgent. "Priority 1, possible intentional overdose. Possible child abuse. Let's move." I watched as they lifted Mason onto the gurney, his tiny form, so small against the straps and the cold metal. I climbed into the back of the ambulance without a second thought. Ryan didn't stop me. As the doors slammed shut, I looked through the small rear window. Carter was already on his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. Dad and Tamara stood beside him, arms wrapped around each other, watching the ambulance drive off. It was like this was just another ordinary moment for them. Like this was somebody else's emergency. My heart sank into my stomach. Inside the ambulance, Ryan worked quickly, attaching monitors to Mason, starting an IV, keeping his voice low and steady. "I testified in that Georgia case," he said, keeping his eyes focused on his work. 9-year-old boy. Same symptoms. Same bruising patterns. Stepmom said he was clumsy. Charges were dropped on a technicality. Family vanished the next week. Never thought I'd see that face again. I stared at him, barely able to comprehend what he was telling me. This wasn't just about Mason. This was about something much bigger. Something dark, something twisted. Ryan glanced at me, his eyes flickering to the heart monitor, before meeting mine again. "Your brother travel much?" I couldn't answer. Not because I didn't want to, but because in that moment, I understood. The smirk wasn't lazy. It was rehearsed. Carter had been practicing this, perfecting his sick little game. And Mason had been nothing but a pawn. The ride to the hospital felt like it was never going to end. Mason's tiny hand was cold in mine. Bump in the road sent a jolt of panic through me. Ryan kept his focus on the monitors. I couldn't stop staring at Mason, willing him to be okay. He looked so small against the gurney. His face pale, his eyes closed, and the oxygen mask gently puffing air into his lungs. Edge had ankle-length hair. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all I could do was sit there, holding on to him, praying he would wake up. The flashing lights outside were a blur. The only sound the steady beat of the heart monitor, and the hum of the ambulance. It was like I was floating in a nightmare. Everything felt unreal. But at the same time, I knew it was happening. And I couldn't do anything to stop it. Ryan glanced over at me, his voice soft, almost like he was trying to give me space. But I could hear the urgency in his words. You said your brother was with him when you found him, right? I nodded. My mouth felt dry. I could barely speak, but I didn't need to. The image of Carter standing there, leaning casually against the wall, flashed in my mind. That smirk. That damn smirk. Like nothing was wrong. Like my son wasn't lying unconscious on the porch. Did he seem worried? Ryan pressed. No, I whispered, shaking my head. Not at all. He just stood there. Said it was discipline. Like Mason. Mason had just been bad and deserved it. Ryan's eyes hardened for a second, but he quickly turned back to the monitors. I knew he wasn't just asking for clarification. He was putting the pieces together. And I was starting to put them together too. Carter had done something to Mason. I could feel it. In my bones. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't just rough housing. It wasn't even discipline. Efferlanghenthing hair. As we pulled into the hospital, I could see the lights of the emergency entrance in the distance. A small part of me felt relief. But as soon as the ambulance doors opened and the team rushed in, the fear hit me again. Hard. They moved with precision, taking Mason from the gurney and into the emergency room without a word. I wanted to go with him. Ryan stopped me. I need to check a few things first, he said, gently but firmly. He'll be fine. We'll be with him in just a moment. I nodded. My hands still trembling, but I couldn't take my eyes off the door where they'd disappeared. As I stood there in the cold, sterile hallway, the weight of the situation started to hit me. Carter had done something to Mason. Something terrible. But why? Why would my own brother hurt my son? I thought about everything we'd been through as a family. All the fights. All the betrayals. But never this. Never this. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to gather my thoughts. The years of tension between Carter and me. The way he always seemed to win. To get away with things. Started to make sense in a horrifying way. Ryan returned a few minutes later, his face more serious than before. He led me into a small consultation room. Your son's stable, he said, but there was an edge to his voice, like he was bracing me for something. I swallowed hard. What's going on? What happened to him? Ryan hesitated for a moment, clearly trying to figure out the right words. We found traces of a substance in his system. He began slowly. Diphenhydramine, a strong antihistamine, at toxic levels. That's why he collapsed. It's not something a child should have been exposed to. And he paused, looking down at his notes, clearly uncomfortable. And what? I asked, my voice, my stomach sinking deeper. And we found multiple bruises on his body. Old bruises. Some of them are healing. Others are fresh. Ryan looked at me then, his gaze steady but full of sympathy. This isn't just an accident, ma'am. Your son's been hurt before. I didn't speak. My throat was tight, and I felt like the walls were closing in around me. I knew. Deep down, I knew that this wasn't just about Mason being in danger. It was about something much darker. Something that connected back to my family. To Carter. You're going to have to file a report, Ryan said softly. We're required by law to notify CPS. This is serious. I nodded. Though. I could barely process the words. The thought of Mason being hurt in this way by someone I loved was too much to bear. As I stood up, ready to follow Ryan to where Mason was, my mind kept circling back to that question: why? Why had Carter done this? And why hadn't anyone in my family stepped up to help him? The answer didn't come. Not yet. But as I walked down the hallway, I knew one thing. For sure. I was going to find out. And I was going to make sure that Mason was safe. No matter what it took. Ryan opened the door to Mason's room, and I stepped inside. The sight of my son hooked up to monitors, still unconscious, still so small, nearly broke me. But when he stirred and his eyes fluttered open, I bent down, brushing his hair out of his face. Mommy. Mason's voice was hoarse. Barely a whisper, but it was enough. It was enough to bring me to my knees beside him. I took his hand in both of mine. I'm here, baby. I'm right here. Mason's eyes were wide with fear, and his voice cracked as he spoke. Mommy, I'm sorry. I drank the special juice. It tasted bad. Carter said if I didn't, he'd tell everyone I still wet the bed. He paused, his voice trembling. Then I got sleepy, and he dragged me outside. His eyes filled with tears. He said I had to fall so you'd see me, and then you'd cry and look crazy. And Grandpa's money would be his. The words cut through me like a knife. I held his hand tighter, trying to steady myself. You did nothing wrong, Mason. I whispered, forcing back tears. You did everything right, baby. Everything. Mason looked at me, his small face full of fear, but he tried to smile. I'm sorry, Mommy. I kissed his forehead gently, trying to keep my own emotions in check. I wanted to protect him from all the pain, from the truth. But I knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning of something bigger. Something that would shake my family to its core. As I sat there, holding my son's hand, the door to the room opened again, and I heard Carter's voice from down the hall. He was talking to my dad. And Tamara, his voice casual. Like he hadn't just nearly killed my son. I turned my head, fighting the urge to run out and confront him. Right then. But I stayed by Mason's side. Because this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The hours at the hospital stretched into what felt like days. Mason was stable. But I couldn't shake the images of him lying on that porch, so small and helpless. I tried to focus on the doctors, on the facts, but every time my mind wandered, it went back to Carter. My brother. The person who should have protected Mason, and yet, had done the exact opposite. I couldn't stop asking myself why. What had driven him to do this? Was it really just for the money? Or was there more to it? I needed answers, and I knew that if I didn't find them, I would never be able to look at my family the same way, again. I spent the next few hours in the hospital's waiting room, pacing. Wireless when Len. My mind was racing with thoughts of Carter and our past. All the things I had ignored. All the things I had hoped were just misunderstandings. But this was different. This was real. Mason had been hurt. Poisoned. And Carter had been the one to do it. I couldn't just sit there and do nothing. I needed to figure out what was going on. Why my brother had done this. That's when I called Marcus. I didn't have the time to waste. And I trusted him more than anyone else. Marcus, I need your help. I said, my voice low and urgent. I need everything you can find on Carter Walsh. His bank records, his history, anything that can give me a clue about what he's been doing. I don't care what it takes. Just get it done. Marcus didn't hesitate. I'll need a photo of his driver's license to get started. But I'll have everything for you in 6 hours. I hung up and stared at the floor. Every part of me wanted to rush into action, to confront Carter right then and there. But I knew I couldn't. I had to be smart about this. I needed evidence. I needed something concrete to bring him down, to protect Mason. That's when I realized how deep Carter's manipulation went. It wasn't just about him and me anymore. It was about Mason's future. About everything I had been blind to for so long. My thoughts kept going back to that trust. The one that would make Mason's life vulnerable the moment he was deemed unfit to manage his inheritance. Carter had been planning this for years, carefully setting the stage for this moment. But why? What made him think he could get away with it? The more I thought about it, the more I understood how far Carter had gone. How meticulously he had orchestrated everything. This wasn't just a bad decision. This was calculated, planned out over months, maybe years. Each one I started thinking back to the things Carter had said over the years. The little comments about my dad's wealth, about how things were always just a little easier for me. But I never thought it would lead to something like this. By the time Marcus called me back, I had already made a decision. I wasn't going to let Carter get away with this. I couldn't. Cole. Mason was depending on me, and I wasn't going to let him down. I've got it, Marcus said when he picked up the phone. His voice was calm, but I could hear the urgency behind it. Bank records, travel history, burner phones, even some odd purchases. It's all here. But there's something else. I think he's been traveling under different names. Different identities even. He's been setting this up for a long time. My stomach dropped. How long? I asked, feeling a cold knot form in my chest. Long enough to make sure he was covered. Long enough to get it all in place. He's been practicing using kids as test subjects. We're talking about at least 5 or 6 incidents like this. Chris. Different states, same method. And Carter's been there. For every single one of them. This isn't just about the money. This is about control. About getting rid of anyone in his way. My head was spinning. How did I not see it? You couldn't have. Marcus replied gently. Each one in hits like. He built a wall around himself, a perfect little mask. He made sure you wouldn't suspect anything. But you're seeing it now. It's all falling into place. I didn't say anything for a long moment. The weight of Marcus' words hung in the air. Heavier than anything I had felt before. Carter wasn't just trying to steal money from Mason. He was using him as a pawn in some twisted game. A game that had cost other children their safety, their lives in some cases. And now, Mason had become a target. What's the next step? I asked. My voice steady despite the rush of emotions flooding through me. I'll send everything I have to you. You'll need to keep it quiet. But I'll handle the rest. It's time to bring him down. As I hung up, I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about stopping him from hurting anyone else. It was about protecting Mason and every other child who had been through what he had. This had never been higher. The stakes had never been higher. By the time I was ready to leave the hospital, Mason was resting, his vital signs stable. He was going to make it. But the real battle was just beginning. And I wasn't going to let Carter get away with what he had done. Not this time. I walked out of the room, my mind set on one thing. Justice. The night. The Pharma Innovation Awards came faster than I expected. I had spent the last few days immersed in the evidence Marcus had gathered. Burner phones, bank records, travel logs. And every piece of the puzzle made my stomach churn. I had to push it all down though. Focus on the moment. The night. The award ceremony. That was supposed to be a celebration, a moment of professional pride. But tonight, it was about something far more important. I stood in the green room of the Raleigh Convention Center, smoothing my midnight blue silk gown for the 100th time. My reflection in the mirror looked calm, composed. But inside, I was a mess. Every part of me was on fire with anticipation and anger. The kind that only grows when you realize how deeply you've been betrayed. I had to pull it together. Tonight wasn't just about me. It was about Mason. Longing hair. It was about bringing Carter's lies, his manipulation, into the light. The invitations had gone out weeks ago. Simple cream card stock, gold lettering, a family photo opportunity, and a champagne toast. Few days after they were mailed, my dad, Carter, and Tamara RSVP'd with their usual enthusiasm, as if nothing was wrong. As if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I felt the familiar rush of adrenaline as the event started. I wasn't nervous about the speech. I'd practiced it over and over in front of the mirror, perfecting each word, every inflection. It wasn't the speech that would change things tonight. It was the truth I was about to drop. In his family had ankle-length hair. The doors to the green room opened, and Carter walked in, sharp in his black Tom Ford suit. Hair slicked back like he was walking a runway. His usual lazy smirk spread across his face as he kissed my cheek. Big night, sis. Proud of you. He didn't know. Not yet. He didn't know what I had in store for him. I forced a smile. Thanks, Carter. My dad followed, arm looped through Tamara's hair. She wore emerald satin that caught every light, her smile as practiced as Carter's. They posed for the photographer, perfectly in sync. A picture. Perfect family, at least on the surface. But beneath that glossy exterior, it was all falling apart. I led them to the VIP table. I sat at center, right in front of the stage. As I settled into my seat, my pulse quickened, and I took a deep breath. And the lights dimmed. And the awards ceremony began. The familiar drum of the introduction sounded, my boss stepping onto the stage. He made his usual rounds, thanking sponsors, running through the formalities, but all I could focus on was the moment coming. My moment. And now, he said, or 2025 Employee of the Year for the second consecutive year. Kendra Walsh. The spotlight hit me. And the applause thundered in my ears. I stood, my heart racing, But I kept my face steady. Entitlement no lort. The walk to the stage felt like it lasted forever. But it was more like I was floating, moving through a haze. The trophy, heavy in my hand. Hicken felt more like a shield than an award. When I reached the microphone, I smiled the smile I had practiced until my cheeks hurt. This award isn't mine, I said, my voice steady. It belongs to every child who has ever been hurt by someone they trusted. The first slide clicked onto the screen. A picture of Carter at 19, hoodie up, buying 4 boxes of adult strength Benadryl at a Walmart in Mon, Georgia. Time stamped in the corner. The room fell silent. I could feel the weight of every eye in the room, their attention shifting toward the screen. The next slide clicked over, showing Carter handing a red plastic bottle of orange soda to a 9-year-old boy in a Dollar General parking lot. The boy collapsed seconds later. The security cam frame was clear, undeniable. The room gasped. A chill ran down my spine as the next slides flashed Carter walking away from a collapsed child on a porch in Lexington. His head turned to make sure no one saw. Carter pouring a white powder into a blue Gatorade bottle in a gas station bathroom in Chattanooga. The pictures didn't lie. And neither did the truth that was coming to light. I glanced at Carter. He looked like he had been hit by a freight train. His smirk had disappeared, replaced by a sickly pale expression. As the slides continued, I could see the realization sinking in, the panic, the fear. But it wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. The next slide, a photo of Carter in a nursing home business office, his phone pointed at the page of Grandpa's revised trust. The clause circled in red. The room murmured. Then the trust clause itself was highlighted, the text clear for everyone to see. If at any time the primary beneficiary, Mason Walsh, in his family had ankle-length hair, is determined by 2 licensed North Carolina physicians to suffer from a chronic physical or psychological condition that impairs his ability to manage property, the entire principal of $4 million, each $100,000, shall immediately vest in the next eligible male descendant in direct line, Carter Walsh, free of trust. The next slide showed a screenshot of Carter's text to a family lawyer, also ever. If Mason ever gets like severe anxiety or something, 2 docs sign off, the money's mine, right? Just asking for a friend. A chill swept through the crowd. Through the crowd as 4 young men, now teenagers, stood up from different tables. One from Georgia, one from Alabama, one from Kentucky, one from Tennessee. They turned, all pointing directly at Carter. That's him, the Georgia boy said, his voice shaking but clear. He poisoned me for practice. The Alabama boy stepped forward, his voice breaking. Me too. The Kentucky boy just stared. Tears running down his cheeks, and the Tennessee boy trembled beside him. They had all been victims of Carter's twisted games. I didn't even look at Carter. His chair screeched across the marble floor as he bolted toward the side exit, knocking over chairs in his path. But 2 agents in tuxedos were already there, cutting him off at the knees. He hit the floor hard, his face twisted in disbelief. Let him go, my father shouted, surging out of his seat. He tried to reach for Carter, but 2 more agents moved in, restraining him. Tamara shrieked my name, trying to pull Carter away from the agents, but it was too late. More agents rushed in. My father was cuffed for obstruction, and Tamara for accessory after the fact. Carter, on the ground, twisted in fury, his face purple with rage. You set me up. He screamed, his words frantic, and he can't You jealous? An agent slammed his face back down into the floor, and Carter's words became unintelligible, drowned out by the chaos. I looked straight into the nearest camera. This is what happens when you try to destroy a child for money, I said, my voice clear and unwavering. The crowd erupted in chaos. Flashes from cameras, shouts of disbelief, phones held high. Carter was dragged out, still screaming, "Dad and Tamara." In tears behind him. I stayed on stage until the last cuff clicked. Then I walked off, trophy in one hand, Mason's future in the other. Yes, that followed Carter's public exposure were a blur of legal meetings, press conferences, and endless phone calls. The world seemed to be spinning faster than I could keep up with. I was finally starting to breathe again. To feel like I was reclaiming some semblance of control. But even as the wheels of justice began turning, there was still a part of me that couldn't shake the anger. The betrayal that I had been building for years. I couldn't look at my father without feeling that gnawing ache in my chest. The way he had stood there, so calm, so detached, while Mason fought for his life. He hadn't even moved when Carter ran out of the room. He hadn't tried to stop him, and Tamara. I still couldn't understand how she could stand by and let it all happen. The pieces of the puzzle were all falling into place, and with each new revelation, my world felt smaller, more suffocating. I knew that Carter had acted alone, but the others, my father, Tamara, they were complicit. They knew something wasn't right, but they chose to turn a blind eye. In his family had ankle-length hair. They protected him, just like they always had. And that was what hurt the most, seeing them protect someone who had hurt my son. The call came early one morning. It was Marcus. "We've got everything, Chris," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Carter's financial records, his travels, his travel history, the burner phones. I've traced his steps across several states. Each been at the scene of every incident. Georgia, Alabama, Kentucky, Tennessee. We've got him. This is bigger than we thought." I gripped the phone tighter. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside me. "We take him down," Marcus said simply. "Would make sure he can't hurt anyone else, ever again." The weight of his words hit me harder than I expected. This wasn't just about Mason anymore. This was about every child Carter had harmed, every family he'd torn apart for his own gain, and bringing him to justice, no matter how long it took. In the days that followed, the legal process moved quickly. Carter was arrested and charged with multiple counts of attempted murder, child abuse, and fraud. His bond was denied, and he was taken into custody, his smug demeanor gone, replaced by a look of disbelief. The man who thought he was untouchable was finally facing the consequences of his actions. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. As I sat in the courtroom, listening to the charges against him, I couldn't help but wonder how long Carter had been planning this. How long had he been setting up Mason, manipulating every move to make sure he could seize the inheritance he believed was his? And what kind of person could do that to a child? My brother, my flesh and blood, had gone to such lengths to destroy a life. And for what? Power. Control. The trial was a whirlwind. Testimony after testimony, the evidence piling up against Carter. There was no escaping the truth. Each woman in his family had ankle-length. As I wanted to believe that this was all just some horrible mistake, I knew deep down that it wasn't. Carter had planned this. He had used Mason as a pawn in his sick game. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't hesitate. I stood before the jury and told them everything I knew about my brother, about the manipulation, the lies, the poison. I spoke about Mason. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. About how he'd been hurt by someone he trusted. And how no child should ever have to go through something like this. My voice wavered at times. But I held it together. This wasn't about me anymore. It was about Mason. It was about Mason and every other child who had been hurt by Carter's twisted ambitions. By the end of the trial, the jury had made their decision. Carter was found guilty on all charges. He was sentenced to 40 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for 25. His face, once filled with arrogant confidence, was now pale and cold. He didn't look at me as the sentence was read. Instead, he kept his eyes fixed on the floor, as if he couldn't bear to face the reality of what he had done. But I did look at him. And, in that moment, I realized that this was the end of something. The end of the person I thought he was. The end of the family I had known. Had ankle-length hair, and it was the beginning of something new for Mason and me. I thought about my father, sitting there in the courtroom. His head down. Not a word of apology. Or word of regret passing his lips. He had tried to say something to me after the trial. But I couldn't bring myself to listen. I had nothing left to say to him. The man I had once looked up to, the one who should have protected me, had failed. When the judge sentenced Tamara, she was given 8 years for accessory after the fact and failure to report felony child abuse.
She had cried
when the sentence was read, mascara streaking down her face, begging the judge to let her say goodbye to her son. But the judge denied her request. The law was clear. And then it was my father's turn. Each woman his hair. He received a sentence of 6 years at a low security federal prison for his role in the cover-up. He kept his head down as the judge spoke, and when the gavel fell, he finally looked up at me. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. I thought about everything I had lost. But I also thought about what I had gained. Mason. Mason was my future. We walked out of the courtroom together. Mason holding my hand tightly. As we made our way to the elevator, I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me in that place. Nothing left to say to any of them. Mason looked up at me. His eyes, still wide from everything he'd witnessed. But when he smiled, I saw a glimpse of the boy he was becoming. The boy who was strong. Who had already fought through more than any child should ever have to. And I knew, in that moment, that everything would be okay. We left the courthouse, and, as we stepped into the sunlight, I realized that this was a new beginning for both of us. It wasn't just about the past anymore. It was about moving forward together. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. It was was a few weeks after the trial when I finally managed to breathe again. The days had blurred together, in a whirlwind of court appearances, meetings with lawyers, and endless paperwork. But through it all, one thing remained constant: Mason. He was healing. Slowly, but surely. And every day, I saw more of the boy he used to be. Carefree. Full of energy. With that spark in his eyes that had been buried under so much fear. We had moved out of Raleigh by then. Away from the house where all the darkness had started. I found a quiet little house 3 hours west, just outside Charlotte. The change of scenery was exactly what we needed. Mason was adjusting well to the new schools, the new neighborhood, and I could finally breathe without feeling like the weight of my past was pressing down on me. But even with all the distance, the questions about my family, about Carter, still haunted me. My father was in prison, serving his sentence at a low security facility. Tamara was at FCI Tallahassee, 8 years for her role in everything. I had no idea what to feel about them anymore. My father's letter, the one he sent after his sentencing, sat unopened on the counter for days. I couldn't bring myself to read it. What could he possibly say that would change anything? He had chosen to look the other way for so long. I shook my head as I thought about it. The betrayal had cut so deep, there was nothing left to say to him. And Tamara, she hadn't reached out once. Not a word, not a letter. I had burned her birthday card without a second thought. Mason had his own struggles, though. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. He still woke up in the middle of the night, his cries echoing through the house. I would find him sitting on the edge of the bed, eyes wide with terror. Tiswer, his little hands shaking. He would whisper Carter's name in his sleep, and my heart would break every single time. But the nightmares were getting quieter. And for every dark moment, there were 100 others where he laughed, where he smiled that wide grin, the one that always made me feel like everything was going to be okay. We started a new routine, one that focused on healing, and I had a new pediatrician, a therapist who specialized in childhood trauma recovery. And the first time Mason hit a grand slam in his travel baseball league, I was there in the bleachers, wiping Anlengo away tears as he pointed at me from third base, his smile so wide it could have cracked his face in half. Lincladent was a turning point. Was a turning point for me. I had spent so long feeling like the weight of everything would crush us both. But when I saw Mason standing there, so full of life, so free, I realized that we were going to be okay. I was going to make sure of it. Int and his family had ankle-length hair. In the meantime, Marcus had been working behind the scenes, pulling every thread to make sure Carter could never hurt anyone again. We had gathered everything. Carter's movements, his purchases, his connections. It was all there. The real piece, the one that sealed his fate, came when Marcus handed me a folder one afternoon, late in the process. "It's done," Marcus said, his voice low, but there was satisfaction in it. "Carter won't get away with this. Not anymore." I looked down at the folder in my hands, the weight of it symbolic. Everything was in place. And when the feds filed their final reports, the investigation would be closed, the case would be wrapped, and Carter's future would be as empty as the one he tried to steal from Mason. I had thought about reaching out to the other families, the ones Carter had hurt before. But I didn't. Not yet. It wasn't the right time. The kids, now teenagers, were starting to find their own peace, and I didn't want to disrupt that. Instead, I focused on Mason. On us, on the future. One night, as I sat on the back porch, watching Mason chase lightning bugs across the yard, eat fuller fondant hair, I felt the full weight of everything we'd been through. I felt the loss, but I also felt the healing. The fireflies, tiny and fragile, blinked in the fading light. Mason cupped one in his hand and held it up to my face. "Look. It's still glowing." I smiled, my heart swelling with love for this boy who had been through so much. "Yeah. Baby. It's the prettiest glow I've ever seen." We opened our hands together, and the tiny light rose into the night sky, free, If you're listening to this, and someone in your family is hurting your child, hear me. Or you are not crazy. You are not overreacting. You are not alone. Record everything. Save everything. En Lars Wikhurthless Utfisert. Like your child's life depends on it. Because it does. Because sometimes the monster doesn't hide under the bed. Pritazan. Sometimes it sits at your dinner table, wearing the face of someone you once called brother. I looked at Mason. His face illuminated by the faint glow of the fireflies. He was safe. He was happy. And I was never going to let anyone take that from him again. The nightmare was over. As we stood there, letting the fireflies go, I realized that this was the beginning of something new. For both of us. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The sun was barely rising when I boarded the flight from Raleigh. Mason was at home with our new neighbors, who had been kind enough to offer to look after him for the day. The tightness in my chest hadn't loosened since I left. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. I couldn't shake the feeling of unfinished business, a lingering sense that the last piece of this nightmare hadn't fallen into place. I had to do this. I had to see it through. Carter wasn't just a danger to Mason. He had hurt so many others. And I needed to make sure he could never harm anyone again. He was no longer just my brother. No longer just a family member. He was a criminal. And I wasn't going to rest until he faced the full consequences of his actions. The flight was long. But the moment I landed in Georgia, the weight of what I was about to do settled over me. My mind kept replaying the phone call I had made to that mother. All those weeks ago, the woman whose son Carter had poisoned. I had promised her that I would get the justice her son deserved. Just like I had promised myself I would protect Mason. When I reached the hotel, I checked into a room that smelled faintly of old carpet and disinfectant. The smell of a place that had seen far too many wary travelers. I wasn't here to relax, I was here to finish something. I needed to speak to the families to show them that they weren't alone in this. That Carter's crimes weren't just isolated incidents, but part of a larger, far more insidious pattern. The first family I met with was the mother of the boy from Georgia. Had ankle-length hair. Her hands shook as she handed me a notarized affidavit and a thumb drive containing the footage from her son's encounter with Carter. I never believed it was an accident, she said quietly, her eyes filled with pain. Not after everything that happened. But no one would listen. Not the police. Not the doctors. Not even my own family. I took the drive from her, my heart heavy with the weight of her words. The footage on that drive confirmed everything I already knew about Carter's sickening pattern. Using children as practice. Making sure they were just hurt enough to trigger an evaluation. It was methodical, calculated, and devastating. Thank you, I said, my voice rough. I won't let him get away with this, I promise. She nodded, but her eyes were distant, haunted. She didn't need my promises. She just needed the truth. The next stop was Montgomery, Alabama. I met with another mother at a small Cracker Barrel off the interstate. Her son had been poisoned with the same substance. The receipt, the medical records, everything was laid out in front of me. And once again, the story was the same. Carter had been there. Carter had poisoned another innocent child, and no one had ever connected the dots. As she handed me the documents, she looked up at me, her face wary but resolute. I kept the bottle. The one he drank from. The doctors never believed me, but I knew something was off. I just couldn't prove it. Her son was now a teenager. But he still had nightmares. I could see the pain in her eyes. The way she blamed herself. Even though she had done nothing wrong. She had been a victim too. I promised her, as I had promised the others, that Carter would be stopped. And as I left her, I knew I wasn't just fighting for Mason anymore. I was fighting for every child Carter had ever hurt, for every family he had torn apart. The rest of the trip took me across the South. Kentucky, Tennessee, and Alabama. Each family had a story, a heartbreaking one, but also one that linked them all together. They had all suffered the same fate at Carter's hands, and now they were all connected by this single, ugly truth. Carter had been hunting them. Hunting children. I reached the last family, in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I was running on fumes. But there was no turning back now. This was it. This was where everything would change. The father was gruff, a man who had seen too much, but he handed me the same thing. The others had the same documents, the same chilling evidence. We knew it was him. He said, his voice thick with bitterness. But we couldn't prove it. Hell, we didn't even know if anyone would believe us. I nodded, knowing exactly what he meant. How many times had I felt that same sense of helplessness? How many times had I been told my suspicions didn't matter? It didn't matter anymore. Not now. After meeting with the last family, I felt a strange sense of closure. But the journey wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I still had to see Marcus. We had to put everything together. Each piece of evidence, each story, each victim. Everything had to be tied up neatly, so Carter couldn't wriggle his way out of this. When I returned to Raleigh, I met Marcus at a storage unit he had rented. He was already there, laying out the files, the digital evidence, and the documents. Had ankle-length hair. We worked through the night, meticulously putting everything in order. Each fact lined up, each piece of evidence fit perfectly. Carter had no way out. But as I looked at the evidence, I realized something. This wasn't just about punishing Carter. Each will had ankle-length wasn't just about getting back at him for everything he had done to Mason to me. This was about stopping him from ever doing it again. This was Ulyss Winter. It was about preventing him from destroying another child's life. And we were close. So close. When everything was ready, we drove it all to the FBI office. Hacklin Flora and Marcus had already contacted Special Agent Monica Reyes, and she was waiting for us when we arrived. As I handed over the evidence, I felt the weight of the case finally lift off my shoulders. It was done. Carter was going to pay for what he had done, and the world would finally know the truth. Agent Reyes flipped through the documents, her expression serious but approving. "This is airtight," she said, glancing up at me. "Well, take it from here." For the first time in months, I felt like I could finally breathe. This was the end. This was where it all stopped. Carter L. Ankle there wouldn't be able to hurt anyone again. He would face the consequences of his actions, and the families he had hurt would finally have justice. And, for Mason, this was just the beginning of his healing. The rest of our lives would be our own. We had survived. I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from us. The weeks after the trial felt like a blur. The courtroom had emptied. The press conferences had ended, and life was supposed to return to some semblance of normalcy. But for me, normal no longer existed. I couldn't go back to the way things were. Carter, Tamara, and my father were all serving their sentences. And that chapter of my life was finally over. But the emotional scars, the pain, still lingered. I sat on the porch of our new house one afternoon, watching Mason play in the yard. It was quieter. The world was quieter here, away from the chaos of Raleigh, and the change had been good for both of us. We had finally settled into a routine, one that didn't revolve around lies, deceit, and betrayal. Each woman in his family had ankle-length hair. But even as I watched Mason laughing, chasing fireflies as the sun set, the weight of everything we had been through pressed heavily on me. Mason had started sleeping better at night, though the nightmares still crept in from time to time. I'd wake up to his soft cries, his small hands reaching for me, and I'd hold him until he fell back to sleep, reassuring him that everything was okay. That was what I had promised him: safety. A future free from the shadows of our past. But there were times when I still felt the need to prove something. To make sure the world knew what Carter had done. To make sure his crimes were never forgotten. I had to know that this wasn't just about me and Mason. It was about everyone he had hurt. Everyone he had destroyed. And so I decided to do something about it. I decided to do something about it. With the settlement money from the trust, I started a non-profit, a place for families like ours. Each woman parents could turn when they found themselves in the unimaginable position of having to protect their children from family members. I called it Safe Haven Trust. We provided emergency funding for single parents who needed to relocate, change their identities, and disappear to protect their children from toxic, manipulative relatives. The first year, we helped 41 families. The stories I heard, the heartbreak I witnessed, were unbearable at times. But it was worth it. Knowing that we were making a difference, that Mason's suffering wasn't in vain, helped ease the pain of everything that had happened. I couldn't change the past, but I could make sure that others wouldn't have to go through the same thing. It wasn't easy though. Every family I helped reminded me of what I had lost, of what Mason had lost, but it also gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't realized I was missing. It was healing for both of us, though sometimes the emotional toll was hard to carry. As the months passed, Mason grew stronger. He made new friends, joined a baseball team, and began to live a life free of fear. And offered an ankle lender. Afternoon, I stood at the edge of the baseball field, watching him run to third base after hitting a grand slam. He looked up at me from the field. His grin, wide and pure, and, for the first time in a long while, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The journey had been long. I had fought for Mason's future, for his safety, and in the process, I had found my own strength. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving, about building a life that wasn't defined by what had happened, but by what we were becoming. Mason ran toward me, his teammates cheering behind him, and he pointed at me, smiling even wider. "Look, Mommy, I did it." I clapped my hands, my heart swelling with pride. "I saw, baby. You were amazing." He ran up to me, and wrapped his arms around my waist, and for a moment, nothing else mattered. Not the pain. Not the betrayal. Not the past. Just Mason. Just the boy who had survived so much, and was now free to live the life he deserved. Later that night, as we sat on the porch, Mason leaned against me, his head resting on my shoulder as we watched the stars. The fireflies were still flickering around us, their tiny lights dancing in the warm summer air. "Mom," Mason said, his voice soft and thoughtful. "Oh, you know how we let the fireflies go? I think they're happy." I smiled and kissed the top of his head. "I think you're right, baby. They're free now, just like us." Mason smiled back, his eyes bright with innocence. "Ellers var." And for the first time, since everything had started, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The journey had been long, but we had made it. We were free. The phone vibrated on the table beside me, breaking the silence, but I didn't rush to check it. It was a message from Marcus. He had sent me updates on the last of the legal proceedings. Carter's appeal had been denied, and his conviction was upheld. He would spend the next several decades in prison, where he belonged. Tamara's sentence would remain the same, and my father. His guilt still weighed heavily on him. His last letter to me, filled with excuses and half-hearted apologies, had burned in the fire pit in the backyard. I had no more time to waste on people who didn't deserve it. As I sat there, the breeze gently swaying the trees, I realized that the past no longer had a hold on me. I had found my way back, not just for Mason, but for myself. I had learned to forgive, not because the past was forgotten, but because I had made peace with it. We were no longer defined by our family's mistakes. We were our own story now. And this time, it was a story of hope, of healing, of a future where we could be free. "Mom," Mason said, his voice full of curiosity, "do you think we'll ever see Carter again?" I thought for a moment before answering. "No, baby. We won't see him again. He's gone, and we're moving forward. We have our own lives now. And they're going to be amazing." Mason nodded, satisfied with my answer, and snuggled closer. I wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight, and together, we watched the fireflies disappear into the night, their glow fading into the distance. The past was gone. The future was ours. And for the first time in a long time, I could truly say that I was at peace,